Hi everyone, welcome. We'll get started in just about a minute here. We'll let everyone join and get settled, and then we'll get started. All right, I think we're ready to get started tonight. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Welcome to our second AAES Virtual Surgeons Lounge. I'm Lauren Santangelo, the AAES Executive Director. Our goal today is to discuss topics and share information relevant to endocrine surgeons in the current environment that we're in. It's also a good chance to just connect with other AAES friends and colleagues and people maybe you haven't seen in a while. So today's lounge is hosted by the AAES IT Committee, and our moderators will be Geeta and Anna Shaw. Before we introduce our panel today, I have just a few quick housekeeping items. So everyone watching or calling in today is muted by default. We can always unmute someone as needed. We encourage everyone to use the chat box in Zoom to ask questions of the panel or of each other, or just to share resources or links with everyone attending. Our moderators will be closely watching the chat and will feed questions to the panel as appropriate. And lastly, we are recording this session and we'll make it available on AAES's YouTube channel. Thank you for tuning in this evening, and I'm going to turn it over to Geeta to welcome our panel.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our second AAES Virtual Lounge. You see our panelists on the slide here, and we'll just take a few minutes to have them introduce themselves along with their institution as well as their areas of expertise. So first off, let's start with you, Dr. Siperstein.
Hi, Allan Siperstein, Cleveland Clinic, and welcome to everybody. Areas of expertise, that'd be hard to figure out. I'm just a country doc, does a little bit of endocrine surgery, but seriously, I've got a great, obviously, interest in education and patient safety.
Okay, thank you. And Dr. Kebebew.
Hi, everybody. This is Electron Kebebew. I'm at Stanford University. I would say my areas, I'm an endocrine surgeon like everybody else. Areas of interest are probably too many. I do clinical research, some laboratory-based research, looking at endocrine tumors.
Great, thank you. Dr. Rachel Kelz. Unmute.
That's how I started. I said, I'm muted, so I'm gonna unmute myself. I'm Rachel Kelz. I can't figure out how to use Zoom despite 3 months of constant use. I'm an endocrine surgeon at the University of Pennsylvania. And again, like the rest of my colleagues, have many interests. My research areas are focused on health services, organization and delivery, and education.
Great, thank you. Dr. Antonia Stephen.
Hi, I'm Antonia Stephen, also known by my nickname Apple, who many of you know me by. I also do exclusively endocrine surgery. I feel very privileged to be able to do that, and I love my clinical practice. I've developed in the last 2 years a keen interest in the wellness program that we initiated at Mass General in our surgery department, particularly mindfulness and meditation and coaching, and specifically how it relates to career productivity and focus.
Great,
thanks for having me.
Great, thank you. And last but not least, Dr. Shalini Arora.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Shalini, and I'm at Kings County Hospital in Brooklyn. And well, other than endocrine surgery, I also do quite a bit of general surgery, and another interest is education, and outside of work, a lot of gardening.
Great, thank you. Well, welcome all of you. I guess Lauren, please get us started. Go ahead, Christiana.
So Lawrence posted the statement, as I'm sure almost everyone has seen, that was sent yesterday. The statement specifically on disparities, inclusion, equity, and they have we have started the diversity committee, diversity, equity, and inclusion committee, and I believe that self-nominations went out today or yesterday. And I just want to leave this here as a few minutes if you haven't seen the statement. And then after a few minutes, I do want to ask Dr. Siperstein, Allan, if you'd speak to really what was the most important thing? What did you really want to convey? And what was the most meaningful thing to you in creating the statement? We'll leave it here for just a minute, and then whenever you're ready to go ahead and speak.
I'd just like to comment that obviously recent events have caused great introspection on my part personally. And what really struck me is, why should it take a video of this man's egregious murder to really awaken us into action? There have been multiple other atrocities that have come to attention recently that unfortunately we're all familiar with. In addition, with the pandemic, in particular, our minority community has been disproportionately affected with both death, illness, and unemployment. And we felt very strongly that as an organization, simply making a statement was not enough. And I thought it was, time for us to really dig deeply into our souls and make a commitment to change. And for that reason, the leadership of the organization rallied behind this concept very, very quickly. And my shout out to James Lee, who took it upon himself to wordsmith and distribute the statement. The Leadership Council, who worked very diligently over the weekend to give their input. And very importantly, I reached out to a number of our other members, including Electron on our group tonight, to really give me counsel in terms of their input into the appropriateness and tone of the statement. And so I really, really appreciate that. And so obviously nobody has any argument or discussion about how atrocious events have been in this country and the disparities in healthcare. And again, we really needed to literally put our sword in the soil and do something actionable about this. Obviously, as president, I can instantly form a task force. It's, in theory, a temporary body, but the leadership, again, over the weekend, very quickly responded to emails and voted to make this a standing committee of our organization. And the purpose and the salient points are outlined on the slide, but I think it's important not only for us to reach within our own organization and do soul searching and do better by our organization, but also to have outreach efforts and do better by our patients. And I think this group, and I obviously welcome a breadth of self-nominations to help in this endeavor, because it is incredibly multifaceted. I think great initiative was taken at the meeting a year ago by Herb Chen, who had our first diversity panel. And I obviously was very touched by that and felt that it should be an ongoing part of our national meeting. Unfortunately, as you know, we had to give up on our meeting in its traditional form this year. And an additional task for this group that I'm asking for would be on an ongoing basis to put on that diversity panel and take it upon as one of their responsibilities on an ongoing basis. I can't tell you how grateful I am of everybody's quick responses to email, their very open feedback and counsel in terms of moving this initiative forward. So I'm very appreciative and very touched that our organization not only acted so quickly, but was so unified in its sentiment. So Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for the creation of the statement. Having been involved in other diversity committees, I know that if there's anything that came of it, I have learned so much as being part of these types of committees, and I can only hope that we're able to come together and create actionable items that move us forward. And as you said, we must do better, and we will do better, and we'll listen and learn and help. So I just want to take this into the last few weeks, last few months have been so different from everyone, for everybody, and our new normal is very different than what we were experiencing in February or January of this year. And I just want to pose to our panelists, how have the events of the last few weeks impacted you? And prior to that answer, I don't want to downplay the diversity statement. We're planning to have a second lounge just related to diversity, equity, inclusion. So speaking to however you like to answer that question is fine. We will have another lounge dedicated just to this issue. But in speaking to what the events mean to you and how things are different for you, any of our panelists want to take that first question?
I can take that question. So we had in Brooklyn it hit us pretty intense. It was quite, I was thinking about it in relation to this question overnight, just, how did it really go? It sort of like went from 10 patients to 50, seemed to be exponential in its increase. It was like, oh, we're going to maybe need you, but we don't know yet. And then all of a sudden it was, we need you tonight. And it went from, for me personally, I was doing all elective cases. I have done trauma in the past, not, I take call in another hospital, so I'm pretty familiar with trauma as well. However, my other colleagues who were doing only elective surgery hadn't done trauma in years, many, many years, maybe some more than 10. And we all of a sudden were taking in-house trauma call. We had a 2-hour session review on how to manage trauma patients. And we're a level 1 trauma center. So we went to taking in-house call and then went from there to just being there all the time. And that was just initially, and then it went, it kind of went away sort of almost as suddenly as it came after 3 months. And then a week later, we were in-house taking a trauma call again because we were now worried because of the protests and the riots that there was maybe going to be a mass casualty. And last night we got 5 gunshot wounds. So the new normal is, I would say, sort of up and down. It doesn't seem to have settled yet. And I feel like at any moment we could maybe be called back in to, do some more of whatever it is that maybe we're not so familiar with.
So you've seen ups and downs in your practice, whereas many of us, or those of us living in not New York City and lesser urban areas, have seen a completely different aspect to our practice. How do any of the rest of you want to speak on how things have changed clinically for you?
I can take that one. So for us, it was really interesting. I'm in Philadelphia, and they asked us to cancel all of our elective cases pretty quickly. And for me as a surgeon, actually, I found that to be much harder than ever talking to a patient about almost any clinical scenario I've had to manage in the past. Because for my entire, life as a surgeon, I've taken for granted that if my patient needed something, I was going to have the resources to be able to provide it for them. And, similar with PPE, it was always something that I took for granted that if I needed a mask because my mask was dirty, I would just put on another mask, and that my patient would be safe and I would be safe. And those phone calls were soul wrenching. So after canceling all of the cases and telling them that we were going to reschedule them in a few weeks, because that was the first wave, we then were told we're canceling them indefinitely as things started to get worse in the city. And so those phone calls were, again, difficult. Interestingly enough, that second round of calls, when it became obvious this was going to be a national problem, the patients were so wonderful and supportive. And, you know, I just couldn't believe how incredible people were around this time at trying to understand what was going on in healthcare and graciously give up their opportunity for care so that somebody who they didn't know and we didn't know what was going to happen would be able to receive those resources. And I found that to be, you know, quite remarkable. And then now, thank God, we've been able to turn things around and open up for elective surgery again. Interestingly enough, I had clinic today and people's theme was, I want to get this done before the second wave hits. I think that's a really interesting response and awareness on the part of our patients. And so, you know, as an endocrine surgeon, it's been really interesting because we treat cancer and all of cancer care was supposed to continue. But for us, we were supposed to put the majority of the thyroid cancer patients on hold. So, so that's how things have been going here. There's also a pipeline's dried up a little bit because people weren't going in to see their primary care doctors, weren't going in to get their ultrasounds, get their biopsies, and those types of things. So I do have great concerns, especially for our most vulnerable patients, about how this prolonged delay might adversely affect some of their clinical situations. But I'm staying tuned and trying to remain positive.
I think the guidance from the AAES really helped me counsel patients, saying, you know, we have some national recommendations. These are the cases that need to be delayed at this step or this, and then as reopening, again, I really appreciated the guidance from the society and being able to reference that to patients. From a basic science perspective, Electron, you're our basic science researcher, and how we were shut down entirely. How has that changed for you?
Yeah, so all research came to a halt. I think our experience, both clinical and research, is very, very similar to perhaps what Rachel described. You know, initially we had the first COVID cases in Santa Clara County, but at one time our census of patients that were COVID-19 was really no more than 12 to 16 in-house. So it was really, what I found was colleagues that were willing to step up for contingency planning, because our acute care surgeons, critical care, and trauma surgeons were going to be taking care of potentially the COVID-19 patients. So many of my faculty in the division actually signed up to do general surgery call, even myself including. And then I think people being sensitive, you know, we didn't have that many patients that were COVID-19 positive, but also the use of the PPE. So I think just as an institution, it was great to see, although we didn't have as many patients, the fact that we were, you know, expecting other institutions to require those resources. So I think first, we didn't get really hit that hard. And then second, my practice didn't really dip that much. I was still doing a fair number of elective cases. And part of it is, you know, although I think the AAES put out a guideline of what kind of cases, it's really difficult to tell some of the patients who had a cancer diagnosis that you are not going to take care of them. And I think given we had in-house testing and we knew who was positive or not, and we were testing patients, we felt that very comfortable and safe to do those cases. I think your question was in regards to research. Everything came to a halt. There is no such thing as social distancing when you're in the lab or even in, you know, consenting patients for clinical trials. And that is just beginning to come online. In a way, administratively, this has been a big headache, to be quite honest with you, because I think I get an email, at least one email on the research personnel and what we need to do, what training these people need to do. They're laboratory-based people. Some of them have not taken care of patients. So that's slowly beginning. Actually, in fact, this Monday is when the first group of people were allowed to come into the laboratory And this is the same for clinical research, unless it was an intervention trial for patients with a cancer diagnosis, everything had come to a halt. So it's just beginning back up, juggling of, social distancing and people using PPE, having enough PPE for them to use as well. So we're just coming online. I think that's the case at most institutions as well.
We certainly have had challenges outside of clinical and research. I know parents who are homeschooling or caring for families or staying away from families. Personally, how has this all affected everyone? If anybody, Apple, you speak to wellness, you're our wellness expert. And that leading into our next question, I don't want to quite steal that thunder just yet, but personally, how has this affected you, or if any of the other panelists want to take that question on how things have been different at home or and managing sort of home and work? Shalini, I know you have those same challenges as well.
Yeah, so I have a son, and my husband is a veterinarian, so he was also deemed to be an essential worker because he works for the Animal Medical Center, and he is a veterinary dentist. And how veterinary dentists needed to stay open when the human dentists were all closed was a little bit difficult to understand, because I really didn't have a choice. I had to go to work. So he, much to his administration's unhappiness, took time off. They were calling and emailing and insisting that he come to work for procedures. And I just told him that, this is the time when we need to decide, because we do have a babysitter, but she's also a teacher, and some schools, that's a private school, didn't close. So yeah, my husband had to take time off for about 4 or 5 weeks, after which they basically asked him to come back. And so we've had a babysitter. We stayed home. Sometimes I stayed home because we were doing 24-hour in-house calls. So other days we could take a day off to recover, where I would be homeschooling. And it was quite stressful because, you come home, you're exhausted, you haven't slept. And just frankly, the things that you're seeing at work were not easy, to come home to be like, okay, now let's do math, and let's, it was quite difficult, I would say. And still homeschooling is the future for now, and it continues. And I now have a babysitter 4 times a week. And that's how it goes.
Any other?
One of the things I sort of noticed or recognized, I have to say I hit a little bit of the sweet spot with how old my children were for this situation. I think it was much more difficult for people with younger children and for people with older children. So my kids are 12 and 14. I had friends with college age and older kids at home, and that was challenging. And then the much younger kids, I felt like needed a lot more attention and hand-holding. I think one of the interesting parts of this time being home and working to some degree, although not performing surgery, I think we all did a lot of telemedicine and video visits and Zoom meetings, and hopefully explored some other areas of interest around our careers beyond being able to do thyroid surgery every day, is that the kids got to have some exposure to that. They heard me talking to patients all day. They understood that thyroid cancer cases were getting canceled. There were curious questions about what kind of cases were allowed to go. There was lots of discussion about how we had to come to a consensus about what surgeries we were allowed to do here in Boston, so that everyone was on the same page for obvious reasons. And most of the time I'm off at work, they're off at school, and they don't get exposed to a lot of the things that go on in our careers. And I feel that that was a positive.
I saw that had a lot of understanding as well, that my children are younger, and it was nice to spend more time with them. It was stressful to spend more time with them, teaching complementary and supplementary angles in between patient phone calls and learning how to do telemedicine. So I think that it's nice that we've all been, it was nice to reconnect as well. And it's affected us all in very different, but similar ways. Do any of the attendees have any, you can raise your hand, you can ask questions in the chat. We're monitoring the chat here also. If anybody else would like to speak, we can unmute you. If you want to go ahead and type in your chat question or raise hand. Allan, I'll let you had a comment, I believe.
I can give a little different perspective. So my youngest daughter, who just graduated from college, spent her last 2 months finishing college at home. And the worst part of it was the personal humiliation I had to go through trying to help her with her genetics homework. I mean, it was ugly, let me tell you. I mean, you know, I thought I knew some genetics pretty well, but the minutia that she was going through, and I was like failing miserably on these problem sets. So for me, it was a real kick. So that's the worst I went through. On the plus, on the other minus side too, is that my wife travels a lot, and so 3 days a week I didn't have to make the bed. And now every single day I've got to make the bed or I get harassed. So there's a little bit of a light thing to it. But I think one of the positive fallouts, to be serious for a minute, is getting to spend more time with family. And I think Apple's point is very important, that my daughter got a little more of an insight in terms of what I did professionally. And I can just relate a dinner table conversation because I deal a lot with billing and reimbursement. And as you know, there are a lot of issues with virtual visits that came up. One of the interesting ones that CMS fortunately waived was the fact that you could not practice medicine outside of your house. And that included virtual visits. And so the rules were waived. And then, as everybody is aware, they expanded the scope from a virtual visit on, for example, the Zoom platform, to allowing audio only. And I had made the observation in my practice that the people who did not have computers and did not have smartphones, or did not want to use their valuable minutes on their smartphone, was a different disadvantaged population. And I had my administrator pull all of our data on our virtual visits. And obviously we had age, race, insurance, zip code, et cetera. And I was talking about how I just pulled the data at the dinner table. And my daughter said, "Oh, that's really cool. I could sit there and write this up as a senior project in one of my kind of medical systems courses that I'm taking." So that's kind of one of the fun things that's kind of come to light from this, is just the different type of conversations and interactions at home than I've had before, where I tended before to try to compartmentalize, work and home life.
Yeah, this is Electron, actually. So I refer to this time period as personal enrichment and family enrichment time, because I ended up spending actually a lot more time with family, and it made me less productive on other aspects of what I do. I have a soon-to-be 14 and 17-year-olds, so that taught me how to use Zoom. You see, I still haven't learned how to put a background in the back. Allowed me to spend, a lot more time, getting 3 to 4 miles in of walking with the dog. So I think there were some really positive things. And then, also getting a chance to yell at the boys, staying up until 2 o'clock in the morning. And you're asking, well, what are you doing at that time? So overall, I think there was kind of positive things that came out of it for our family.
Well, that's, Electron, thank you so much for sharing that. And actually, the last few comments that you've made and that Allan have made about looking at kind of the, pluses of this sort of forced time out of the hospital for a lot of us is a good sort of segue into one of the things that we wanted to talk about in this virtual lounge, which was wellness. So I'd like to kind of open the floor to that and say, well, what did you think as as our panelists? What was your thought about wellness before all this? What did you think wellness meant? How has that changed, if it's changed? What new strategies have you had to adopt? Given sort of the environments we find ourselves in. So go ahead.
So I took an executive leadership course about 2 years ago when I was getting my MBA, and that's a whole different story. But it was really fascinating because I thought I was going to go learn how to like command the boardroom and, be heard with a different voice and all these nonsense ideas that I guess I had. But instead it was all centered on becoming the leader of yourself. And so it talked about life across the continuum of these 4 domains, work, your community, yourself, which I think everybody on the panel probably at some time or another is guilty of forgetting that you exist, and then your family. And so I really struggled when I got stripped of my clinical identity for the beginning part of this pandemic. And actually part of my anxiety came from potentially being redeployed as an intensivist when I hadn't been in the ICU in 15, 20 years. And so I actually resorted back to the Stu Friedman principles from Total Leadership and just said, when this bucket goes away, you divert your attention across the remaining parts of yourself. And I found that to be incredibly helpful and to get my sort of ship righted, because I freaked out at the beginning of the pandemic. And, my husband's also a physician, so we had to get our wills in order because I was afraid we were both going to have a problem and leave our kids stranded. And it was pretty crazy. And my kids are 15 and 18. So, thank God they're not 2 and 4, but at the same time, I don't necessarily feel that they're ready to handle that kind of a trauma. So I would say distributing your identity across all the facets of your life during this time for me has been a very good opportunity to stay in the right mindset.
Very well said. Thank you, Rachel. Shalini?
So I would say wellness has been a little bit more difficult for me. Before the pandemic, I used to go to the gym. I've had a lot of back issues, so I was going to the gym, I would say just about every single day to use the elliptical machine, which when that was taken away, I just, in addition to not being able to do what you usually do and having to do what you're not used to doing, I started having quite a bit of back pain and sleeping on, so God help me, like the worst couch ever for months on end. It's not fun. So what did I do? I would say now that spring started and sort of started early for me, one of the major saviors, I actually have a balcony, which, in New York is a blessing. So because I feel just terrible knowing that many of my friends, but I know like all my patients don't have an outdoor space, and just not being able to go outside, I think just takes away something, just at least for me, I need to go outside every day, even if it's just for a few minutes, just to be outdoors. And there were days when we, like when it was still cold, you couldn't really be outside. And that really, I found, was very hard. Just being inside, and God help you if it's a rainy day or, just a really cold day, it was really tough. We started like a exercise, well, not a program, but I tried to do different exercises at home, I would say. And then almost all of them would start up with back pain. So I found an 8-minute program. And I will say that an 8-minute program seemed to be the right one for me, as far as being able to, just do even something before I went to work to do a 24-hour shift, or coming back and just being able to do something for 8 minutes. It was huge. It's supposed to be a 12-minute program, but the other 4 minutes didn't quite work out for me. So we did an 8-minute program, and that was really good. And I would say balcony and that. And other than that, just family, just being able to have all this extra family time has been. And I don't know if you guys all experience this, but I've seen and communicated with my family every single day. Like I was talking to my mother on some platform or another every day, which is not, usually it was every few days, or I have seen my sisters on Zoom and my brother's kids so much, and it's been really a lifesaver. It's been just great, because we were always at work. I would maybe see them once a month, and now it's been every day sometimes. So that has been another really huge thing for me, having all this family and hearing from friends that I hadn't heard from in months, some of them in years. People just coming out of the woodworks and checking on you, saying, hey, how are you? Are you okay? We heard it's really bad in your area, and do you need anything? That was really, really, in lieu of being able to see people contact and not go out. That was huge, I found.
Thank you very much, Shalini, for sharing those deeply personal experiences. At this point, I'm going to ask our attendees, our participants, our non-panelists as well. I'm sure if you have sort of your own personal experiences or thoughts that you want to share, just type them into the chat box, and we will unmute you so you can share with everyone who's attending, as well as the panelists, and get some input. Apple, I would love to hear, your sort of take on, our panelists, what they're sharing, and what you have seen and learned, and share your expertise with us.
Well, I'm not sure how much expertise I have, but I really love listening to what I just listened to, because in everybody's own way, without any sort of formal program or, personal coach, you guys are all touching on the aspects of wellness that are really important. So being outdoors and being in touch with nature, exercise. And somebody talks about wellness, I recognize that everyone has their own way of pursuing it and finding it without any sort of formal program. And that's sort of, I think, one of the greatest things about it. We initiated a formal program at Mass General about 2 years ago, well before this all happened. And it was a three-pronged approach to the wellness program. The three-pronged approach was, one was a sort of physical, dietary and exercise program that was initiated with a series of videos and goals that were set by one coach for anyone in the department who was interested in participating. The second prong was a course, a 6-week course in mindfulness and meditation that was run by our Mindfulness Institute at MGH. And then the third one was personal one-on-one coaching. And there was a lot of success from the program. We all learned a lot and have initiated more things related to that. But I think with the things that I've observed more recently with the current epidemic and all the other events, is that we as surgeons, and I wonder even in particular endocrine surgeons, where we do sort of one thing very well, that we really, really like to be in control. A lot of people like to be in control, but surgeons really like to be in control, and that's a good thing when you're in the operating room and performing surgery and working with a variety of residents and other staff people. But I think, as we've all learned, especially those of us who are parents, is that you can't always be in control in all facets of our life. In fact, it's quite the opposite. And trying to pivot and adjust to those different circumstances has, I think, been a major challenge for me and probably for others. And that's where I sort of discovered the mindfulness, which is a way of detaching yourself from any sort of a set outcome, but yet still swinging the bat for a home run every time. And I think that in this sort of pandemic time that we really have an opportunity to try out new things in our careers and in our lives, and to remain as open as possible to what other creative juices might flow. And that could be related to endocrine surgery, it could be related to research, it could be related to something completely different. I have been spending a lot of time coaching the residents. It sort of evolved to the point where they were kind of asking for sessions, and that's now something I'm interested in doing and spending more time doing. And I think this pandemic sort of presented a need for it, and also showed me how interested and how much I like doing it. So I think that these are amazing opportunities for us to accept less control and perhaps even achieve more because of that.
This is,
Thank you very much, Apple. Go ahead, Electron.
yeah, I'm just curious, because one of the things I think that's come out of this, the COVID-19 pandemic, and specific for me, is I recognized how much little time I need to spend physically at work, that I can get a lot of things done. And that's been actually a very healthy thing for me to recognize. I'm just wondering what other people's, it's totally retooled me in my approach moving forward of how much things I need to physically be at work and be away from family. I'm just wondering what the other panelists or even in the audience think about that.
I mean,
yeah, go
yeah,
ahead,
I think that's true. I've sort of always had to be a little bit more flexible. I think because of the age at which I had my children, and my husband, like everybody mentioned, they have a spouse who's also working, so that changes the game, I think, a little bit up front. But we talked about this a tiny bit last night in preparation for this workshop, and Adam Grant, who's one of the Wharton guys, says he thinks that the work week is going to go to like a 6-hour day, and that the majority of people are going to realize that they don't really need to spend, obviously he's not focused on surgeons, but that, for the non-clinical time that we spend, or the non-operative time, I'll even go a step further, that we spend at work, aside from that, we're going to really cut back on how often we have to be at our desks at work. And even as I don't know about you guys, but our medical center's got an enormous footprint now. So, you walk 20, 30 minutes to go just between buildings in the hospital now. And, I'm not sure it's good for us or bad for us, but if you spend that time on a Zoom platform or something like that, then you get to go home 20 or 30 minutes earlier and potentially spend some more time outdoors or doing something else that Apple mentioned that will be good for your overall joie de vivre.
I just want to comment that at the Cleveland Clinic, we now have we've been forced into the virtual world, in that we had goals to slowly ramp up virtual visits. We saw some of the advantages of it, but this really, forced our hand in terms of, for a period of time, offering by far the majority of our care that way. Now that we're trying to sink back into the traditional mold, to segue into Electron and comment, is that we're now targeting many of the providers spending a day or two a week at home doing virtual visits. Now that may work a little bit less well for the surgeons, where I can, work in, couple days, 2-3 days a month for surgeons to do follow-up, post-op follow-ups, et cetera. But on the medical side, they're very enthusiastic about spending a chunk of their time both virtually as well as the opportunity to shift hours. And currently, because the pandemic's going to be with us for a long time, this allows our clinics to have appropriate social distancing, et cetera, because they're less crowded and the hours can be splayed out more.
Great comments, everyone. So it sounds like, we've all discovered a few new things about how we could manage our or integrate our work and home lives and our personal interests. How much of this do you see persisting into the future, or do you think we'll be sliding back into our old patterns? And how can we keep some of this, that we've learned and accepted, and maybe positive changes in how we're doing things?
I mean, I have to say I had a nice little group meeting with sort of our wellness group, and one of the quotes was, "I never want to go back." You know, this idea that you have to be at the office from 7 a.m. to some other, you know, defined period of time every single day, and that's the way it's going to be, and that in order to perform at a certain level, that's what's required of you, I think has been completely debunked by what we've experienced. And in fact, sort of one of my personal experiences with regards to attending and participating in meetings is that it is hard when your kids are growing up to go to early meetings when you are getting them off to school, and often on the OR days you're out early in the morning, so that the non-OR days, if there's a meeting that, you know, you didn't always get to it. And having all our meetings on Zoom actually allowed me to be at every single meeting. And I'll even confess that one of them, which is an hour and 15 minutes, I ran 5 miles attending the meeting with I was ready to stop, catch my breath, unmute myself, and make a contribution to sort of a thyroid case have come up. And it was just this fantastic experience where I was completely engaged in the meeting, and I was listening, and I was into it, and I got my exercise, and I felt great. And I hope that some of that continues, because not even just for people with kids, for anyone to sort of have a flexibility and be in the OR when you need to be in the OR, but, you know, maybe be outdoors or exercising or not having to leave the house so that you can't take your kids to school, you know, 45 minutes after your meeting starts or whatever it is. I think it's exciting, and I hope that some of it continues.
I think I could just say that I've had the complete opposite experience. And I don't want any of it to continue like this. I mean, I've done maybe a handful of televisits, maybe a handful. We started doing them, and then it was no more. We just shut down the clinics. We just overnight, we thought we could do them. The medicine service and other services were, but for surgery, all surgery, we basically shut down every clinic. We had no clinics. There were no televisits. There was one clinic going on that was the surgeon clinic, and a breast surgery. One of the breast surgeons was still seeing her patients, but for the rest of us, I didn't have any televisits. I had first during that first week, and then after that, it was just, you know, and being at home, at least for me, was not like I said, it was not relaxing, because also there's a lot of organization of stuff that was required. I'm the program site director at my hospital, so it was constant meetings on the phone, just, you know, like while homeschooling. It was not like you can't go outside like at all. So it was very stressful. It was like trying to do math with one hand and trying on the other hand to, you know, figure out some resident schedules, like someone else is positive for COVID. And, you know, it was just constant juggling of everything. I felt like I got spit out at the other end of a hurricane. I don't want to continue any of that. So like, it's just different.
Well, I appreciate, again, your sharing that with us all, Shalini, because clearly, you know, people's experiences have been different, whether they've been, you know, at the epicenter, you know, like you have in New York, you know, when the full force of the pandemic hit. And so not being able to kind of, you know, have even the time to think about sort of these, you know, other things. You know, what sort of institutional, you know, given sort of our varied experiences, do you think there have been or might be some institutional changes, you know, moving forward with respect to, you know, what is productivity? What is presence? What is, I mean, you know, not being at the hospital from 7 to 7, you know, will you now be considered as not, you know, earlier we were thought as maybe not so interested then in academics if you're not clocking in and clocking out, you know, at those hours. And how can we as current and future leaders, you know, all of us on the panel, but also attending, you know, how can we contribute to maybe changing the culture a little bit, if we think that's the appropriate phrase?
I think
Maybe
there has
I'll
to
have
be a
you
lot
start
of,
off with it, Apple, go ahead.
I think there has to be a lot of support for people to play their own game.
Right.
You know, to figure out what their game is, what they love to do, what they're good at, what their biggest contributions are going to be, what they get the most joy out of doing. Not that any of it is always a joy. There's a lot of hard work and grind that goes with all of this. But to support people in really being the best that they can be. And if that means that they are in their office most of the time, some people work that way best. If it means not doing that, that's okay too. So I think sort of an acceptance, promotion, and support to kind of pursue your best career in a way that works well for you is the way to go. And I think I'm going to guess that some institutions and some departments are better at that than others. As opposed to trying to put everyone in a cookie cutter box, you know, you're an academic surgeon, you're going to do exactly this many cases, and you're going to write this many papers, and you're going to try for these types of grants or national recognition, that we would work more as a group. So if you have a group that each person fills a slightly different role and supports the others in doing the other things, as opposed to a sort of all trying to churn out the same papers or all trying to kind of go for the same thing. And that's what I would really define as success going forward in this generation.
Thank you, Apple.
I guess my question is, how do you get leadership to recognize that and value that?
Right.
You know,
It
this is
starts from the top.
That's what I started with. Like, how do we use the momentum or the knowledge that we've learned? So, Electron, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I guess, every institution had different cultures, but, at Stanford, actually, we have 3 different faculty line, and depending upon which faculty line you're on, at least our expectations are very different. There's mostly clinical faculty appointment, clinician educators, and then there's MCL, where people are expected to do a significant amount of scholarship, and then the other one is mostly scholarship. So, I've been here for 2 years, and certainly my expectation of the faculty in the division is that they live up to it and contribute to the team in that manner. And, I think it's a very flexible environment that we have here. And I think the advances with telemedicine wasn't taken up quite as well, but now that we're forced to use it, I think that will enrich people's experience, or at least how much time that they have to spend dealing with electronic medical records and Epic. And I think what Apple said is true. I think teamwork makes the dream work. We have all different aspects that we're going to contribute to, and I think at least for our division, I think it's a healthy mix of people and what their focus and what they're expected to do is.
Rachel?
Yeah, I was enjoying listening to everybody else's input. I wholeheartedly embrace that. I think an individual at their best is going to have the most to contribute, and an organization that values individuals as a part of a team is going to be at its peak performance. So, if this is the jolt that unfortunately our society needed to raise awareness for the value of the individuals and individual understanding who they are and who they want to be and how to be happy, then maybe something good will come out of this. This has been unprecedented times, and I do hope, I truly do hope that positive things will come forth for all of us. Some of us have been obviously challenged much more than others by the realities around us.
Okay. Back to you, Allan. You were talking about leadership and how institutional buy-in. So thoughts as president of our association.
Yeah, no, I think we need to take a new perspective at things. I mean, I'm baby boom generation. My bad personal joke is I'm what I call a tweener. in that I get the AARP magazine and read it, but I'm too young to be on Medicare. So I'm, you know, that certain generation there where we were raised at the, you know, you put in more hours, you'll probably do a little bit more than somebody who puts in less hours. And, you know, the work-life balance was, you know, how that was balanced. You know, I think that, you know, this has taught me, and obviously we do a lot of sensitivity training in terms of how various generations view work-life balance. And I think what we've learned is that you can be, you know, productive and happy and have better wellness to have a non-quote traditional work pattern. And I think what we need to work towards is to embrace it. I think, you know, one of the positives is that this has been a great natural experiment in terms of how we can mix and vary what we do on a daily basis, still be productive, still pay attention to our wellness, pay even more attention to our families, which I think, you know, many of us are guilty of paying less attention to than they deserve and than we deserve. So you know, I would hope that this is going to be a real reset in terms of not only how we live our personal lives, but also very importantly, how we interact, you know, with our patients. The interacting with patients virtually has really opened my scope. I was dabbling in it before, got thrown into the pool recently, and I really have become to appreciate the value not only for me, but for the patient of interacting that way. So I think there are a lot of very positive lessons that we're going to learn. We just have to remember them and incorporate them into our lives going forward.
Thank you. Very well said. You know, we're almost out of time, but I still want to, since we started a couple minutes late, we're just going to go, you know, a little bit over if everyone's okay with that. I have a question for Dr. Stephen from our attendees. Now, this is a question from Melvin Sequera. I can't help asking, but why is Antonia called Apple, or am I hearing it wrong? Curious minds want to know, Dr. Stephen. If you're comfortable
Great
sharing.
question.
Yeah.
What about my wellness and meditation expertise? So when I was born, my dad decided to call me Apple, and that was kind of that. But my mom would not agree to giving that as my formal name. So she named me after my grandmother, who's Italian. Her name is Antonia. And that's kind of how it settled in. And unlike most people with nicknames when they're tiny little babies, my parents decided to continue and broadcast this nickname. When they brought me to school, they said, this is Apple. And no one seemed to have a problem with it. So it stuck. And then when I went to boarding school, I thought, oh, here's my chance. I'm going to convert to Antonia. And there were maybe 2 or 3 people from my elementary and middle school at this enormous boarding school who very quickly spread the word that I was not Antonia. So that was the end of that. And I had the pleasure of living in Dr. Siperstein's garage for a year. So he may have heard this.
You were in the carriage house, not in my garage. Let's set the record straight on this.
It was a really nice garage. Trust me. Allan redid the hardwood floors for me before I arrived. I'll always remember that. So it was a fantastic year, Allan, and I miss you guys.
The one blight on your CV, Apple.
So Apple, you and Gwyneth Paltrow's daughter have some stories to swap. You know, here's
and actually Gwyneth Paltrow's daughter was born when I was at the Cleveland Clinic. And everyone in the clinic, Cindy and everyone said, look, you know, you definitely were there first. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So,
well, thank you
for asking.
Thank you for sharing that. You know, in the last few minutes, I just want to talk a little bit about what we touched on briefly initially. And then I think as Shalini brought up, you know, we were in the midst of dealing with sort of a pandemic and, you know, then in a way, a second wave or pandemic, given sort of the recent events with George Floyd and his death and of others before him. And, you know, we as healthcare professionals have been aware of the disparities in medicine. And, you know, all of this has also brought that to the forefront. The protests, not just for the death, but the deaths, but the disparities that we're seeing, you know, most recently in the COVID pandemic, but we have known about these for a long period of time. I wonder if all of you in just the last few minutes could comment on what you're seeing as you reopen. Are some of our patients not coming back, can't come back? And I think we'll talk more about these issues in our next virtual lounge as well. But I think I'd like to sort of at least start us thinking about those things as we kind of near the conclusion of this session. So Shalini, maybe you can share, since you mentioned the protests in New York and people, you're being back to work again. And
yeah, I mean, so because I happen to live in Prospect Heights, around the corner from Barclays Center, where a lot of the protests start or take place, at least in the Brooklyn ones. My neighborhood has been, my 4-6 blocks around me are sort of shut down. They're not shut down, they're barricaded. So there's a lot of police, 3 or 4 blocks every morning. Luckily, because people all depend on the subway and the buses, people don't want to take public transportation, and now the subways are closed at night. So for me, my colleague was picking me up, bringing me to work for the last 3 months and dropping me home. And now he has to drop me off 3-4 blocks away. That's for me, and I'm so lucky to have access to that. But for the patients, so far, most of the patients are not really coming back. We have opened the clinics for 2 weeks or so. I saw 2 patients today. Last week, only 1 came, and the other ones, some of them said, I'm not getting back on the bus, and other ones don't want to take the subway. And I'm sure that there are others who just don't actually have a way of getting around. So it's not going to be so easy. We're also in a city hospital system, so our patients are just not wealthy at all, and it's a tough situation. Many of them, many times, took the we gave them taxi fare to come and go. So many of them are unable to come without that taxi fare. And right now, nothing is being given. So it's going to be a really long road, I think, because the other big concern, I'm sure that everyone, I don't know, it was unfortunately, it was the first thing that came to my head, maybe not the right thing, but all I saw when I saw all the protesters was, oh my God, this is just going to bring another pandemic right back up. And, we all were thinking that we would have a second wave, but now it's just like, so the feeling of that is so intense. So I understand the need for the protests, but I hope that the masks many of them are wearing are enough, and that we don't end up back in a situation where we have, sick people dying without their family members. And these patients just, I don't think that, they deserve that. So I don't know. I don't really have many answers, just a whole lot of thoughts.
Thank you for sharing them with us, Shalini. It's really important and valuable for all of us to hear, your experiences. So thank you. I know it's painful. I can see it and we can hear it in your voice. Thank you for, being willing to share those experiences with us. Other people on the panel, in your areas, hospitals, just sort of these last few minutes. Rachel, as a disparities researcher, any sort of, closing comments or?
I think you said it best at the beginning when you said that these are not new problems. These are problems that have been going on for far, far, far too long. And so a tremendous amount of sensitivity is needed to listen actively and work towards action. We had incredible peaceful protests here, supported by a very diverse group of participants. We had horrendous acts of violence and vandalism that were completely separate from the peaceful protests. that were disruptive and scary. And I think it's just really important that we come together as a society and as humans and find a better road.
Well said, thank you. Any other comments? Okay. Anna, did you want to just sort of wrap things up?
I just wanted to say thank you first to all of our panelists for a really, really insightful discussion. To our attendees, thank you for being here. I think for all of us, the last few months and the last few weeks have all separately caused lots of introspection for all of us. And I think that being able to speak openly, if anything, both the COVID situation and recognizing the unrest in our country and bring to the forefront the issues that we have with race that haven't been addressed, that we continue to face daily, that have come much more to the forefront, that it allows us to have difficult questions. And thank you so much to the panelists for being open and honest and sharing of yourself the things that are challenging and being able to share these insights so that we can all move forward. So thank you to everybody. And I look forward to
Thank you, Anna.
I look forward to our next panel with
Thanks,
even more
Allan.
insights.
Oh, yay!
Thanks, everyone.
Enjoyed the show.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye-bye. Thank you very
so much for
again.
hosting.
Yes, thank you very much again. Really appreciate it. And I think a lot of our attendees will probably be able to sort of look back on this recording if they weren't able to attend and sort of think, you know, yes, I felt all those things and I'm glad people said them out loud. Okay, so thank you again.
Thank you, Geeta. Thank you,
Thank
Anna.
you.